его превосходительство господина Маджида Абд-Аль-Азиза, постоянного наблюдателя в постоянной комиссии наблюдателя от Лиги арабских государств при Организации Объединенных Наций. Решение принимается. Совет Безопасности приступает к рассмотрению пункта 2 повестки дня. Сейчас я предоставляю слово господину Рамизу Алакбарову.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, after 2 years of devastating war and unimaginable human suffering, we now have an opportunity to conclude a dark chapter in the history of Israeli-Palestinian conflict and set up a course for a more just and peaceful future. On the 9 October agreement, based on United States President Donald Trump's 20-point plan, secured a ceasefire and hostage release in Gaza. It was the culmination of a remarkable diplomatic effort by United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. I commend all the mediators for achieving this critical breakthrough. Tragically, it has taken us too long to reach this moment. The unbearable trauma inflicted on Palestinians and Israelis through last generations. The situation throughout the occupied Palestinian territory remains dire, and the destruction in Gaza is beyond description, while Palestinian civilians, children, women, and men continue to suffer immeasurably from the effects of the war and deprivation. And as we speak, there are still remains of deceased hostages in Gaza, while their loved ones a dignified burial. The agreement represents hope for a better future, but the dynamics are extremely fragile. A return to conflict must be avoided at all costs. The remaining deceased hostages must be released without any further delay. Humanitarian assistance must enter the street at scale to meet the enormous need of the population wherever they are. All parties must abide by their commitments under the deal, and the agreement should be reached to implement the next phase. Mr. President, since the ceasefire took effect, the UN and its partners have rapidly scaled up humanitarian operations across Gaza. The magnitude of destruction and continued suffering of Palestinians we have witnessed in Gaza is staggering. Many families remain displaced and without access to the most basic services. The urgent needs are immense in health, shelter, water, sanitation, food, and environment. The UN and its humanitarian partners are working now to implement our 60-day response plan. The plan sets out concrete measures to streamline customs procedures, expand access routes, facilitate the entry of critical items, restore essential services, and ensure the safe movement of humanitarian personnel. As part of the broader humanitarian reset, the plan is grounded in humanitarian principles, prioritizes those in greatest need, and enhances accountability, drives greater efficiency, and safeguards the space for principled life-saving actions. Already, as tracked by the UN 2720 mechanism for Gaza, we've increased facilitation in the entry of humanitarian supply by Israeli authorities. The humanitarian partners have scaled up aid delivery with a 46% increase in aid tracked by the UN entering the street in the first week of the ceasefire. Crucial assistance in the areas of food, hygiene, shelter, and health is being delivered in greater quantities, bringing much-needed relief to Gaza population. But this is not enough. Much more still needs to be done. To fully meet our targets and ensure an effective response requires more crossings and functional relief corridors, safe passage for aid workers and civilians, unrestricted entry of goods, sustained entry of fuel, and operational space for the UN and NGOs, including renewal of NGO registration, all in accordance with humanitarian principles. The UN is closely engaging in all relevant coordination mechanisms, and I welcome the efforts of the member states to facilitate a scaling up of assistance, including through the new Civil-Military Coordination Center. While the ceasefire is in effect, the ongoing violence in Gaza, continued but sporadic attacks and strikes by IDF and Palestinian armed groups, as well as apparent killings of Palestinians by Hamas and other armed actors, also undermines humanitarian efforts and threatens stability in the street. Restoring order will be a critical step in facilitating relief efforts and supporting Gaza's recovery. We must act quickly to build on the current ceasefire towards a comprehensive agreement, or there is a serious risk that insecurity and violence will persist and undermine the recovery and reconstruction effort. To support the UN's response in Gaza, a robust aid coordination mechanism and accelerated international support will be necessary. Reconstruction will require a collective effort and should be Palestinian-led. Working with Palestinian Authority, international partners, civil society, and the private sector, UN is prepared to mobilize and help coordinate these efforts in line with the ceasefire commitments and the New York Declaration and building on the Arab Plan for Recovery and Reconstruction. Mr. President, the Secretary General has welcomed the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice on 22nd October, which found, inter alia, that Israel is required to fulfill its obligation under international law with respect to facilitating relief of the population of Gaza and to cooperate in good faith with the United Nations and its entities. Mr. President, while we are focused on supporting the ceasefire and scaling up our response in Gaza, we must not overlook the alarming situation in the West Bank. Tens of thousands of Palestinians remain displaced from their homes in the northern West Bank in the wake of the large-scale Israeli security forces operation and continued closures, particularly in and around the refugee camps. Palestinians must be allowed to return to their homes and local economies need to function. With the annual olive harvest underway, Palestinians are yet again subject to deplorable acts of settler violence while trying to access their land. The violence must stop and perpetrators must be held accountable. Meanwhile, the Palestinian economy and the Palestinian Authority fiscal situation continue to face severe challenges. According to the PA, Israel continues to withhold some $3 billion of Palestinian tax clearances revenues, creating an unsustainable fiscal situation and impacting the Palestinian Authority's ability to meet financial obligations and pay public sector salaries in full. Mr. President, we are at a momentous but precarious juncture. The United Nations is committed to seizing this opportunity, but the scope and scale of the challenges ahead will require the full support of this Council and of the international community. Political will, financial resources, and a genuine commitment to creating a better future for all is needed. President Trump's 20-point plan and the declaration signed at the Summit for Peace, agreement to end the war in Gaza in Sharm el-Sheikh, have finally managed to secure a viable path towards ending the war. The forthcoming Cairo Reconstruction Conference, co-hosted by Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, and the United Nations, will be an important venue to advance recovery and reconstruction for Gaza. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the political horizon. We can build on the momentum created by the President Trump's plan and consolidate through tireless mediation efforts. The international community has affirmed in recent weeks its commitment to charting a course towards sustainably ending the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The high-level international conference for peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution meeting on the margins of the UN General Assembly provide a pathway. The United Nations will continue to support all efforts to end the occupation and resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with international law and UN resolution, realizing a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, of which Gaza is an integral part, live side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. Спасибо большое за внимание.
Я благодарю господина Алакбарова за его брифинг. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю государства Палестины, имеющего статус государственного наблюдателя.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you for assuming the presidency of the Council and to thank you for convening this open debate. Allow me also to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator for his briefing and relentless efforts. Mr. President, we knew that the ceasefire was the only way forward, the way to save lives, the way to stop the massacres, the way to ensure families can reunite, Palestinian families and Israeli families. A ceasefire to stop the bloodshed, to release hostages and prisoners, to end an organized famine, to bring the horrors to an end. And finally, a ceasefire is here. Some are saying it is imperfect, it is volatile, it is transgressed, it is fragile, but it is here. There are reasons for skepticism. Some will say a skepticism informed by history, by experience, by precedent, by past pain, ache, and agony. But our role is not to be bystanders while things fall apart, or to have doubts, criticism, or objections and wait for time to prove us right. Our role is to collectively work to ensure the ceasefire holds, prevailing over those rooting for its collapse or working to make it fall apart. And we appreciate on that context, the collective efforts to ensure this aim and the constant engagement of the mediators of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, and of course the United States at the highest level, to preserve this delicate ceasefire, to save lives that are too sacred. This is what the ceasefire is, an opportunity to save lives. What it will become relies on what all of us will do next. Mr. President, we do not forget those who awaited this day, but did not survive to witness it. Nor do we forget the survivors who welcome it scarred and starved and in mourning. We do not forget the journalists who did not live long enough to announce the ceasefire. We do not forget the doctors and the humanitarians killed for trying to save lives. We do not forget 20,000 Palestinian children killed by Israel, or their parents who have to walk the earth under their crushing shadow. We do not forget the orphaned, the maimed, the amputated, the tortured, and those still buried under the rubble. We do not forget Hind or Dunya, Reem and Khalid, Anas and Yusuf and Jubran and Eve and Salam and Siwar and Selena, Mahmoud, Adam, and many, many others. I've said before, I'll say it again, the most unjust expectation, that one that falls only on Palestinians, is that they should move on, regardless of the lives lost, of the limbs lost, of the loved ones lost. To have entire families obliterated and move on, to lose everything, everything you love, everything you built, everything you are, and be expected to just move on. But vengeance and hatred lead nowhere. Violence is an impasse. More bloodshed cannot be the answer. Justice and peace are the only way forward. But will these millions of Palestinians have justice? Will they be able to finally live in peace in their ancestral land? There is no Israeli security at the expense of Palestinian lives and Palestinian rights. There's no coexistence with occupation and subjugation. There is freedom for Palestine and its people, and shared peace, shared security, shared prosperity for Palestinians, Israelis, the people of the region, and the world. And here let me quote a very important historical document, the US Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We cannot formulate it any better. We are endowed by the same Creator with these same unalienable rights. Peace cannot come from the denial of these rights. It comes from their fulfillment. We are not less worthy of freedom, not less entitled to security, not less able to contribute to shared prosperity. Enough dispossession, enough displacement, enough death, enough despair. In Gaza, but also in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where tens of thousands have been displaced, many have been killed, and where many communities are under constant attack. What do we tell Afaf Abu Aliya, a 55-year-old woman, mother of 5, knocked unconscious with a club by an Israeli settler as she was harvesting olives in Tormos Aya, and beaten again while she lied unconscious on the ground? Israeli settlers' attacks have intensified. You have all condemned them without exception. But this condemnation does not protect our people from these repeated attacks. These extremist settlers, together with occupation forces, spread fear and violence in the hope to intimidate and displace and push annexation in all directions. Till when? People killed and maimed and arbitrarily detained, homes demolished, settlements built, land expropriated, communities uprooted. Till when? If after a century of conflict and dispossession and displacement and wars and occupation and colonization and blockade and walls, if after the 7th of October, if after genocide in Gaza, we are not yet convinced that it is time for peace, that we owe future generations peace, what will ever convince us? Mr. President, over the course of the last few weeks, the entire world rallied around clear objectives, following unbelievable outrage across the globe. From the Global Alliance launched by Saudi Arabia, the EU and Norway, to the Madrid Group, to the Hague Group, to those who recognize the state of Palestine, and among those around the table, the last among them to have joined France and the UK, that I want to acknowledge here, to Algeria and the members of this council, all working for an end to the horrors and moving towards peace. And the International Peace Conference, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France, which demonstrated true leadership at its helm, and which endorsed the New York Declaration, a landmark document that charts a path forward to peace. The world mobilized for an independent and sovereign Palestinian state, for the two-state solution. They mobilized for peace. Palestine is committed to peace. It is committed to the full implementation of the New York Declaration, which charts a clear and irreversible path to freedom, peace, and regional integration. It will do its part, and it continues to commit to you here, once again, we will uphold our obligations. We are implementing our commitments, and we expect others to do their part and to uphold their obligations. Mr. President, we and many others around the world welcome the efforts of President Trump for peace and pledge to work with the US administration and with regional and international partners to move from a ceasefire to just and lasting peace. As was stated by the United States, it is for Palestinians to govern themselves. There is no substitute to Palestinian self-determination. There is a critical role for regional and international actors and mechanisms in support of Palestinian governance and independent statehood, and not as a substitute to them. We need to work together to ensure success. The task is monumental, but it is worth it. It requires collective and coordinated efforts. There were efforts and plans before, but maybe there was never before such momentum for peace, stemming from horrors the region witnessed the last 2 years. Just peace will change the face of the region and the fate of its peoples. The independence of the State of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution will pave the way for regional integration, a prospect many thought and still think impossible, but that is within grasp if we collectively decide to rid the region of wars and occupation and finally choose shared peace, shared security, and shared prosperity. It is time to end this conflict once and for all, so people never experience such pain and loss again, and all peoples can live in peace and security. These last few days, Mr. President, we saw families reunite, finally. Some with their loved ones still alive, able finally to embrace them, and some whose bodies were returned to be buried and to be mourned. There are still families waiting for their loved ones. We keep them in our minds. As the world tracked the release of 20 Israeli hostages, as it should, thousands of Palestinian prisoners were being released with undeniable evidence of the ill and degrading treatment they were subjected to. As the world followed the search for the bodies of 28 Israeli hostages, it must not forget that under the same rubble, you have the bodies of thousands upon thousands of bodies of Palestinians. This should be a moment to remind us all of our shared humanity, of the suffering future generation can and must be spared. This should not happen any longer. Regardless what camp you belong to, what cause you defend, what right you proclaim, no one should ever justify harming civilians, abducting them, torturing them, killing them. No one should ever justify holding remains, sometimes for years and decades, and depriving families from their ability to offer them dignified burial. Summary execution are never acceptable, regardless who commits them. No one should explain that there is any title or any right that can justify atrocities. No one, never, ever, under any circumstances. Mr. President, Gaza is an integral part of Palestine. Families in Gaza suffered more than enough. They have no homes to return to, no schools, no hospitals. Bombardments cannot continue taunting and haunting them. Aid cannot continue to be weaponized, as was said by the International Court of Justice yesterday. The ceasefire must be upheld. There is no other choice. Reconstruction must proceed, and we support all efforts in this regard and look forward to the conference in Cairo towards that aim. And here, allow me to thank the mediators for their relentless efforts that led to the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. Egypt, which endured smearing campaigns and attacks. Qatar, whose territory was struck by Israel as it was mediating. Turkey, which joined these mediation efforts. And the United States. And let us speak plainly. The United States is a superpower. And as such, it has always a choice to fuel the fire or to help cease the fire. In this case, President Trump used all his weight to achieve a ceasefire agreement that saves lives and that releases the hostages. We all listened to the chants on Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. They know there would be no agreement without President Trump. And the region and the world mobilized around his effort as they understand that this is a chance for life, for freedom, and for peace. They understand he alone can save Israel from itself and from the temptation of brutal and indiscriminate force and annexation that has isolated it around the world. The two votes in the Knesset yesterday demonstrate that Israel has yet to renounce this path. Other policies and other measures and other statements as well. But we appreciate the clear message from the Trump administration against any push for annexation. We will work with President Trump, with regional and international partners, to transform a fragile and volatile ceasefire into just and lasting peace, with Palestinian agency and Palestinian liberation as our goal, with mutual recognition and peaceful coexistence as cornerstones. What we need is not a pause in the violence and injustice, but an end to them. Violence is an impasse. It must not be fueled nor tolerated. It must be stopped. And we will not relent in our rejection of violence against all civilians. Likewise, injustice must never be justified or shielded. It must be brought to an end. Palestine is committed to peace. We are the ones who need it most, and peace needs to be a shared objective to become a shared reality. We must seize this opportunity to end the suffering and work for freedom and peace, regardless of how great the challenges are. Help us demonstrate to our people that there is a peaceful path to freedom and to dignified life. The efforts to undermine the Palestinian Authority and its ability to perform its duties despite its full-fledged commitment to peace that has been put to test over the course of the last 2 years in unbelievable manners, aims at preventing our independence and our statehood. If there are requirements placed on the Palestinian Authority, it must be empowered to fulfill them. And Israel has also obligations that need to be monitored and implemented. We will not shy away from our obligations and from our commitments. We owe to our people to fulfill them, leading them to a path of liberation and peace. A new generation can wake up to a very different region where no one is killed, no one is abducted, no one is tortured, where cooperation and coexistence replace occupation and conflict, where shared security replaces perpetual war, where shared prosperity replaces pillage and devastation. Isn't that worth striving for? We owe it to those who were killed. We owe it to those who survived. We owe it to future generations. It is time for peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя государства Палестины за его выступление. И сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Израиля.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator for his briefing. Mr. President, today we gather at a historic moment for our region. Israel has achieved what many thought impossible. All of our living hostages are home. The remains of 15 fallen hostages have been recovered and given the dignity of a proper burial. Hamas has been forced to accept a deal it rejected from the very beginning, to return the hostages and to disarm. This achievement was not born of chance, but of a combination of courage and conviction. History will remember that in the wake of the worst massacre of our people since the Holocaust, that Israel kept its promise to defend our people, to bring our hostages home, and to eliminate future threats to our security. Despite the pressure of many members of this very council, despite the political theater, the condemnations, and the hypocrisy, Israel stood firm. We did not waver. We prevailed. But our struggle is not over. There can be no peace, no future, and no rebuilding of Gaza while terror still remains. 13 fallen hostages remain in Hamas's hands. We will bring them home and give them the dignity they deserve. The world must keep the pressure where it belongs, on Hamas, to return the hostages, to lay down its weapons, and to honor the peace plan it signed. Mr. President, we embraced the return of our hostages. Our nation has been swept by emotion, joy and relief, but also deep pain and grief. We have seen in the last few weeks mothers embracing sons, fathers reunited with their children, young couples holding each other again. In every home, in every community, Israel has felt the weight of what was lost and the miracle of return. families reunited, lives once trapped in darkness have seen light again. But we cannot forget what they endured: starved, beaten, shackled, deprived of food, water, and light, forced to dig their own graves, humiliated, and yet they survived. They held onto their humanity even in the face of evil. As we welcome home the living, we also mourn the fallen who have now returned to us for proper burial. They remind the world that Hamas's cruelty knows no borders, no faith, no mercy. To the families of the fallen hostages and to all who still wait for the return of their loved ones from Gaza, we say, Israel has not forgotten them. We will do whatever it takes to bring them home, all of them. Mr. President, make no mistake, Hamas has already violated the ceasefire. They promised to return the bodies of our fallen within 72 hours. Yet still today, more than 300 hours after the ceasefire began, 13 fallen hostages remain in captivity. Hamas lied at the negotiating table, and they lied still to us, to the negotiators, and to the entire world. They know exactly, and we know that they know, where our fallen are. They simply refuse to act. This is not a matter of logistics. It is a calculated cruelty, psychological warfare designed to inflict pain and to buy time. Let me be clear. Our fallen hostages will be brought home by diplomacy, if possible, by other means, if necessary. It should come as no surprise that the same hands that refuse to return our dead are the ones that still pull the trigger. Just 9 days into the ceasefire, Hamas terrorists opened fire in an IDF-controlled area, killing 2 Israeli soldiers and seriously injuring many others. These are not allegations, they are facts. Yet, as Hamas violates the ceasefire, too many look away. There is no clearer example than the outrageous and false moral equivalence drawn in recent weeks, and I'm sure we will hear it today. We have heard commentators, diplomats, even world leaders equate the release of innocent hostages with the release of convicted terrorists. They speak as if these two acts were the same, as if those civilians who were kidnapped at gunpoints from their homes and held in tunnels could ever be compared with those who planted bombs on buses and slaughtered innocent lives. To bring our people home, Israel made choices no country should ever have to make. We released those jailed for murder, terror, and kidnapping. Let me give you a few examples from those who were released. Imad Kawasme, he planted a bomb on a Beersheba bus and killed 16 innocent people. Muhammad Aref Sama, who helped murder 23 civilians in Jerusalem, and many more. Yet some still try to blur the line between victims and their attackers. Let me be clear, hostages are not criminals. There can be no moral equivalence, none. In Israel, families cried with joy as loved ones came home after years in darkness. In Gaza, crowds celebrated murderers returning from prison. That is the difference between a nation that values life and a terror movement that glorifies death. Israel acted not from weakness, but from strength, to save lives and to advance peace. But peace demands more than promises. It demands disarmament. Many of you are already picturing Gaza's future. You have seen the plans, the ideas, hotels rising on the coast, schools filled with children, parks and public squares. Now I could end each of you a pair of virtual reality goggles and show you the videos and the ideas that are circulated around about the future of Gaza. But before we get lost in virtual reality, let's remove the goggles and look at what is really happening today. Because before classrooms open or a single home is built, one truth must be faced. Hamas must go. Hamas must disarm. All the plans, the pledges, the visions, the videos, they are all virtual reality until terror ends. Members of this council, let me show you what reality looks like today in Gaza. This image was taken in the Sabra neighborhood in Gaza City on the 15th of October, just after the ceasefire began. Hamas gunmen emerged from their tunnels, clean uniforms, full stomachs, armed and organized. Almost immediately, they turned their guns on their own people. They attacked men, women, and children, hunted rivals, and carried out public executions. No evidence, no trial, just terror. And from the UN, silence. No condemnation, no accountability, no emergency session. That silence is dangerous. It emboldens Hamas. They walk the same path as ISIS, with the same brutality and the same contempt for human life. How can there be a future for Gaza while its people still live under fear? That is why disarmament is not only a security demand, it is a moral duty. Mr. President, peace cannot coexist with terror. The peace plan before us is an opportunity. But opportunity alone is not enough. We must act now to ensure Hamas is disarmed, not only with statements, with action, with pressure, with resolve. Hamas still sits on a deadly stockpile: assault and sniper rifles, RPGs, rocket launchers, anti-tank missiles like the Cornet. Beneath Gaza, their factories hum, their tunnels run deep. Disarmament means more than words. It means those weapons surrendered, the tunnels sealed, the factories shut down. It means dismantling Hamas's entire war machine, every command post, every weapons line, every tunnel. True disarmament strips Hamas of power itself, its ability to plan, to arm, to strike. Members of this council, blueprints and promises of reconstruction will not stop bullets. Only real disarmament will. Now is the moment to turn words into pressure and hopefully pressure into peace. Last week, the Jewish people celebrated Simchat Torah, a holiday that marks the conclusion of the annual reading cycle of our Bible, the Torah, and the beginning of a new cycle. Every year we read the same chapters. As we open the first chapter, Bereshit, the book of Genesis, we return to the moment creation began, and I quote, "And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness." Before creation came order. Before life began, chaos had to hand. God separated light from darkness, bringing clarity, structure, and peace. So it must be now. Before Gaza can be rebuilt, terror must be removed. Before peace can begin, Hamas must lay down its weapons. Israel is ready to do its part and move forward. But peace cannot live alongside terror. Every day, Hamas refuses to disarm. They drag Gaza deeper into darkness. The time for excuses is over. Hamas must disarm now, fully and completely, so that light, no darkness, shape our future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя Израиля за его выступление. Сейчас я сделаю выступление в качестве представителя Российской Федерации. Благодарим заместителя спецкоординатора ООН по Ближневосточному мирному процессу Рамиза Алакбарова за обстоятельный доклад о положении в регионе. Для нашего ключевого мероприятия в ходе председательства мы выбрали открытые дебаты по ситуации на Ближнем Востоке. Они проходят в весьма примечательный момент, когда на первый план наконец-то вышла дипломатия, и у палестинцев и израильтян появилась надежда на длительное и устойчивое прекращение огня. Это именно то, к чему мы и другие члены Совета Безопасности последние 2 года призывали в контексте разворачивавшейся в Газе трагедии. Поэтому Россия приветствовала договоренности между Израилем и Хамас о прекращении боевых действий в секторе Газа, несмотря на то, что множество важных для БВУ сюжетов осталось за скобками и не получило отражения в итоговых документах. Установившееся перемирие во многом стало возможным благодаря неустанным трудам египетских, катарских, турецких и американских посредников. Высоко ценим эти дипломатические усилия, не прервавшиеся даже тогда, когда казалось, что шансов договориться уже нет. Отмечаем особую роль в этом президента Соединенных Штатов Дональда Трампа, чья личная вовлеченность в стремление прекратить бойню в Газе придали необходимый импульс для достижения договоренности. Во всем мире, с болью в сердце, следившим за новостями из Газа, с большим облегчением восприняли известие об освобождении последних заложников, удерживавшихся в секторе, а также возвращении домой в обмен на почти 2000 палестинских заключенных. Среди вернувшихся домой израильтян есть и наш соотечественник, уроженец Донбасса Максим Харкин, вопрос об освобождении которого, как и других пленников, регулярно ставился российскими дипломатами в ходе соответствующих контактов в регионе. Уважаемые коллеги, 2 года боевых действий опустошили и выжгли души как палестинцев, так и израильтян. Заслуживающая осуждения террористическая атака Хамас 7 октября и последовавшее безнравственное коллективное наказание палестинского народа останутся в учебниках истории в качестве вопиющих примеров ненависти и антигуманности, назидания будущим поколениям. Мы лишний раз убедились, что насилие и ненависть всегда порождают ответное насилие и ненависть, а путь к миру лежит исключительно через диалог и взаимные уступки, в том числе во имя устранения коренных причин конфликта. Важно, чтобы установившееся пока еще весьма хрупкое перемирие не постигла судьба январских договоренностей, рухнувших на фоне взаимных обвинений сторон в их нарушениях. К сожалению, сегодня мы наблюдаем опасность повторения подобной ситуации. Так, палестинцы вменяют израильтянам регулярные нарушения прекращения огня. Израиль же недоволен затягиванием Хамас передачи всех тел погибших заложников. Призываем все стороны к строгому выполнению соглашения. Боевые действия, с жертвами которые стали десятки тысяч мирных палестинцев, не должны возобновиться ни при каком сценарии. Уверены, что этому поспособствуют и итоги прошедшего 13 октября в Шарм-эль-Шейхе саммита мира. Важно, что подписанный по итогам декларации особый акцент сделан на защите прав человека, гарантиях безопасности и достоинства палестинцев и израильтян, а также искоренение экстремизма и радикализма во всех формах, включая расизм, без чего невозможно процветание ни одного общества. Необходимо, чтобы аналогичную оптику мировое сообщество применяло и в контексте продолжающегося ущемления киевским режимом прав русскоязычного населения на Украине. Уважаемые коллеги, отмечаем, что благодаря достигнутому перемирию в секторе Газа наметился определенный прогресс в части гумдоступа. По данным УКГВ, восстанавливаются поставки продовольствия и медицинских товаров, а гумагентство ООН, в том числе БАПОР, уже начали создавать временные учебные пространства для перемещенных детей. Этот положительный импульс необходимо сохранить и наращивать, чтобы облегчить страдания газовитян и обеспечить восстановление базовых услуг. В то же время мы не можем не отметить, что ограничения на доставку гуманитарной помощи по-прежнему сохраняются, а гуманитарные маршруты функционируют не в полную силу. В этой связи крайне важно снять оставшиеся барьеры и действовать в соответствии с представленным у КГВ 60-дневным планом гуманитарного реагирования. Рассчитываем, что недавний визит замсекретаря ООН по гуманитарным вопросам Тома Флетчера в Газу и Рамаллу будет способствовать налаживанию эффективной работы не только в секторе, но и на западном берегу реки Иордан, где сохраняется нестабильная ситуация, в том числе продолжаются нападения на палестинцев, о чем регулярно докладывает КГВ. Уважаемые коллеги, перемирие и прекращение огня в Газе – это важный и долгожданный, но все-таки только самый первый этап на пути к долгосрочному урегулированию палестино-израильского конфликта. Избежать рецидива трагедии возможно лишь при возобновлении политического процесса на известной международно-правовой основе по формуле двух государств, предусматривающей создание независимого палестинского государства в границе 1967 года со столицей в Восточном Иерусалиме, сосуществующего в мире и безопасности с Израилем. Эта задача, неоднократно подтвержденная международным сообществом, не должна оставаться в тени миротворческих усилий и тем более игнорироваться при выработке планов действий и дорожных карт. Нельзя забывать и о незаконном строительстве израильских поселений на палестинской территории. Эти планы должны быть пересмотрены, а уже построенные в нарушении резолюции Совета Безопасности, в том числе 446, 452, 465 и 2334 поселения демонтированы. Хочется надеяться, что позитивная динамика на треке БВУ самым положительным образом скажется и в других частях региона, включая Ливан, Йемен и Сирию, и в конечном итоге приведет к общей нормализации в арабо-израильских отношениях. С осторожным оптимизмом следим за продолжающимися непрямыми переговорами между Западным Иерусалимом и Дамаском. Относительно стабильной остается обстановка вдоль голубой линии, где еще год назад бушевала полноценная война. Пример Газы, когда подавляющая часть заложников была освобождена благодаря переговорам, должен продемонстрировать Израилю, что отказ от ставки на грубое силовое вмешательство и создание приграничных буферных зон в пользу диалога и искреннего учета интересов соседей может дать ощутимые плоды и помочь обеспечить безопасность собственных граждан лучше любых самых современных систем вооружений. Россия, неизменно поддерживающая доверительные и конструктивные отношения со всеми странами региона, без исключений, настроена продолжать вносить свой вклад в дело мира на Ближнем Востоке как в национальном качестве, так и в роли постоянного члена Совета Безопасности. Готова работать со всеми сторонами, разделяющими цель достижения справедливого, долгосрочного и устойчивого мира на всем Ближнем Востоке на основе выполнения известных резолюций Совета Безопасности ООН, касающихся палестино-израильского конфликта. Я вновь приступаю к исполнению обязанностей председателя Совета Безопасности, и сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Дании.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alec Barra for his briefing. I'd also like to pay tribute to all United Nations personnel and humanitarian workers on the ground working to deliver aid into Gaza, and to those civilians and hostages for whom the good news has tragically come too late. Mr. President, over the past few weeks, we have witnessed a rare moment in history. After more than 2 weeks of imaginable tragedy and loss, we have a long-needed ceasefire in Gaza. The guns have fallen silent, and in that silence, the first notes of hope can finally be heard. Denmark warmly welcomes the ceasefire and expresses profound gratitude to the United States, Egypt, Qatar, and to others who, in spite of numerous setbacks, have worked relentlessly to make this deal a reality. This ceasefire offers respite and relief. When the hostages and their families, who have lived in terror and despair, can finally begin to heal. When the skies above Gaza carry not the sound of warplanes, but the laughter of children. This is the promise that peace could hold. And yet, as this day finally dawns, we cannot forget the immense suffering that lies in its wake and the long road that lies ahead. Far too many will never wake up to see this peace. Those buried under the rubble, those who fell prey to terrorists, those ensnared by starvation, or those simply caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. This peace is also for them. It is in their memory that we must sustain it. And we must not ignore that Hamas has taken the opportunity to reimpose its campaign of terror on Gaza's population. We continue to stress that Hamas must not be allowed to play a role in the future of Gaza. Mr. President, this ceasefire is not an ending. It is a beginning, fragile but full of opportunity. Now we must act with urgency. The road towards lasting peace will not be easy, but the Security Council must shoulder its responsibility. We must spare no effort, and we trust that this Council will urgently come together to establish a mandate for an international stabilization mission. Denmark welcomes the UN plan to alleviate the suffering of civilians. We stress that the UN and other humanitarian organizations must be fully enabled to deliver the humanitarian aid that millions so desperately need, in line with the agreement on the first phase. Every corridor must be opened, every convoy protected. Aid shipments must be swiftly allowed without undue impediments. Humanitarian and health workers must be protected. We take note of ICJ's advisory opinion yesterday, which clearly establishes that Israel must not obstruct the work of the United Nations and is obliged to accept and facilitate humanitarian aid delivered by UN organizations, including UNRWA. International and local NGOs should be able to work without unnecessary restrictions. In this regard, we repeat our call on the government of Israel to provide authorization for all international NGOs' aid shipments and to unblock essential humanitarian actors from operating. Denmark stands ready with $15 million in support of humanitarian and early recovery efforts, which comes on top of the approximately $153 million humanitarian aid already allocated to the Palestinian people since 2023. Our goal is clear. We must stop the insidious spread of famine. We must ensure that the sick receive the care that they so desperately need. Denmark is also prepared to further support the early recovery as well as the reconstruction of Gaza. But reconstruction is not merely about concrete and steel. It's about dignity. It's about proving to a generation that peace is not a dream, not a privilege, but a right. In deeds, not words. Mr. President, this ceasefire must not be a pause before the next tragedy, but the first step towards a lasting peace. The full implementation of the peace agreement is vital. We're on the right track, but we're not there yet. We deplore that Hamas has not been able to surrender all the bodies of the seized hostages as agreed under the framework. And we deplore that Israel is leveraging humanitarian access and as a result has capped the flow of aid into Gaza. We must not let the opportunity that this peace presents slip between our fingers. We now hold in our hands a rare opportunity to turn this moment of respite into a foundation for a just and enduring peace based on the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in security, dignity, and peace. This, a two-state solution, is not only a pressing issue, it is a prerequisite for long-term stability across the region. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Дании за ее выступление. И сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Гаяны.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barov for his briefing. Mr. President, our meeting today takes place at a time of great promise and opportunity for the people of Palestine. This moment, however, must be managed carefully, fully anchored in international law, and with the protection and well-being of civilians a central priority. With that said, Guyana welcomes the peace plan achieved between Israel and Hamas for ending the hostilities in Gaza and for the release of hostages taken during the 7th October attack. We commend the tireless efforts of the mediators, the United States, together with Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, and all who have contributed to making this a reality. Mr. President, 2 years of Israel's war in Gaza has wreaked havoc on the Palestinian population. Gaza itself has suffered massive destruction, with some experts estimating that the recovery could take decades and cost billions of dollars. Then there are also costs to which figures can never be attached. These include time that orphan children have eternally lost with their parents, the months of agony that the relatives and friends of hostages have endured, hoping for their safe return, and the psychosocial impacts of the war that would be felt for generations to come. But the peace plan has brought renewed hope, and we all must work to ensure its success. On this note, Mr. President, Guyana is very concerned about the violations of the ceasefire. We urge the parties to abide by the commitments made and to prioritize peace in Gaza. Mr. President, the next phases of the peace plan are extremely critical. We must eschew all ideas that do not line up with international law, that undermine the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, and that dilute the two-state solution. At the recently convened high-level international conference on the two-state solution and the general debate for the 80th session, there was a clear international consensus that the two-state solution remains the only just, comprehensive, and viable path to resolution of the Palestinian question. Guyana therefore urges that the next phases of the peace plan take this into account. We are baffled that less than 2 weeks after the Gaza peace plan was approved, Israel's parliament voted to give preliminary approval to a bill which imposes Israel's sovereignty over the occupied West Bank. We call on Israel to abandon this effort, which, if implemented, will be a violation of international law and will undermine the two-state solution. The West Bank is a critical part of the future independent state of Palestine. Mr. President, the war in Gaza reached many lows in the conduct of international relations, and I specifically wish to highlight Israel's belligerent approach to international organizations operating in the occupied Palestinian territory to meet humanitarian needs. We welcome the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice yesterday, which clarifies the obligation of Israel as an occupying power to work with United Nations agencies to facilitate humanitarian aid in Gaza. We particularly welcome the specific provisions of the opinion regarding UNRWA. We call on Israel to respect the court's advisory opinion and to choose the path of compliance with international law. This is especially critical now that a massive humanitarian effort is required to scale up humanitarian interventions in the immediate term and to advance reconstruction and recovery over the long term. Mr. President, the central role of the Security Council as the UN organ with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security must be emphasized, particularly as we contemplate the next phases of the peace plan. This includes the establishment of the temporary international stabilization force. I conclude by reaffirming Guyana's commitment to all genuine efforts aimed at achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the Palestinian question. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Гайаны за ее выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Alekpaev, for your briefing. Colleagues, President Trump's 20-point plan for peace offers a historic opportunity. His diplomacy brought the ceasefire in Gaza with support from around the world. It brought home 20 living hostages who spent 738 days held captive in a living hell. It offers hope for the people of Gaza. It offers hope for the Middle East to turn the page on a millennia of violence and to usher in a new age of peace and prosperity. Under President Trump's leadership, the United States has ended 8 conflicts across the globe over the course of just 8 months. And with the help of our friends in Qatar and Egypt and Turkey and the region, this most recent success may prove to be the greatest opening of them all. This historic success is cause for celebration. It's cause for determination, but it cannot be cause for complacency. As President Trump has said, the job is not done. And in that vein, Hamas must immediately return the bodies of the 13 remaining hostages, including the bodies of American citizens Itai and Omer Nutra, as promised under the agreement. Their families, colleagues, their families deserve dignity. And Hamas must likewise follow through on its commitment to disarm. The president is not playing games here. And simply put, Hamas is finished in Gaza and does not have a future there. And if they do not follow through, they are in violation of the ceasefire and will face consequences, severe consequences. The future of Gaza can be one of peace and prosperity. And we also note, as has been noted here today, the extremely disturbing and bloody executions of by Hamas of the people in the streets of Gaza, in broad daylight, on camera, for the world to see. This is further evidence that Hamas is unfit to rule the Gaza Strip, cannot be trusted